Welcome everybody. So you're seeing a lot of cameras here, you're seeing a lot of staff here, you're seeing these microphones here. Obviously the microphones are not for us hearing each other. We are trying to be as transparent as possible with these roundtables. So when you speak, if you can move the mic, it's really going to be great for us, for the staff that is going to be looking at some of these conversations, taking notes and putting together the report. So be cognizant if you are near one or away from one. That's why we have them there, just so that we can make sure to record as much information as possible to use it in a way that will hopefully make a meaningful difference on this issue. My name is Brian Marr. I'm the co-chair of the New York State Assembly Minority Task Force on Human Trafficking and Exploitation. This was created by the Minority Conference because about a year ago I attended a public hearing in New York City on this issue. I heard firsthand from survivors, and I was absolutely mortified at both the fact that it was happening, to the degree that it was happening, not just in New York City, but statewide, my complete lack of knowledge on what this actually is, as opposed to what you see in the movies or read in the newspaper, and how prevalent it is in literally every single community. Compounded with the type of individuals who are most likely to be susceptible to being exploited, which are the folks that are coming into this country, the human beings, and how that potentially can and has exacerbated the current situation, we decided to put some work together to hold task force roundtables like this throughout the entire state of New York with stakeholders for the purpose of you all educating individuals like myself and my colleagues to tell us what we can be doing better from a legislative standpoint, from a budgetary standpoint for our nonprofits and so many other areas, and honestly, most importantly, utilizing our seats as leaders in the community to do some of the low-hanging fruit, simple things like educate ourselves and our colleagues and our communities and certain workforces on what to look for and what this really looks like. So today, we are going to have a conversation starting from 4 talking points, but expanding wherever it needs to based on your expertise. Don't be shy. We are here to listen, to learn, and this will be the 7th in-person roundtable. We've been to Long Island, Suffolk, and Nassau. We have been to Rockland County. We've been to the Capital Region, Buffalo, Syracuse, and we are ending right here in the beautiful village of Walden, my hometown, where I was born and raised. That is by choice because I knew that we would have some amazing individuals with great experiences and passion on this issue. People like Kellyanne, Sheriff Arteta, and so many others that are here. I'm very excited to have this conversation with all of you now that I am so much more educated, but still not educated enough on what's happening here. So the first thing we're gonna do before we get into breakouts and have discussions is everyone's gonna get to know everybody that's in the room. So you all have heard from me. I'm gonna start now to my right and have our sheriff introduce himself. Basically, who you are, your name, why you're here, why are you physically here, and what your position entails.
I'm the sheriff, that's the whole answer. Sheriff Paul Arteta. I've been sheriff for 2 years now. 31 years at the sheriff's office altogether. We understood that human trafficking is very labor intensive, and we had to dedicate people to these investigations. So I have 2 of my folks here that are assigned to HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, and I also have one of my deputies here, Pastor, to handle these types of investigations. We're dedicated to it. We work a lot with Kellyanne as well on a lot of different issues, and we're just dedicated to this.
Thank you, sir.
Lieutenant Jason Meehan with the town of Montgomery, and same, we're of course dedicated to see what we can do to help.
Sal Patella, Staff Development Coordinator with the Orange County Department of Social Services. My role is training for our staff. We work directly with Fearless, not just on training, but obviously on any issues that can pertain to domestic violence and trafficking. We try to maintain robust training for our staff. Again, with Fearless, but it's an ongoing effort because as we've had discussions in the past, we understand that as fast as you move and as much as you learn, there's always steps ahead of us by the perpetrators.
I'm Judge Carol S. Klein. I'm starting my 25th year in family court, and I'm representing all the judges. We are very, very strong advocates of understanding not only this issue, the children who come before us. We know some cases where they actually are, and we are trying to be very proactive as much as we can and learn. There were several of us who went, Suffolk County had Nassau Suffolk, we had our family court judges conference, and the speaker was on human and labor trafficking. So we know it's a very big issue, and the scariest thing to us is New York is the leader right now of all the 50 states, so we have to do better.
Thank you.
And thank you for inviting me.
Of course.
Deputy Sam Pastor, I'm here with the Sheriff's Office. Thank you for the introduction. I'm here just to get a better understanding of what types of resources myself as somebody that encounters victims can offer them and what is available. Also, other things that need to be identified from our standpoint, serving our communities.
Look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for being here.
Brian Devincenzi, Assistant Superintendent of Walden Central School District. Happy to be here, listen and learn, and see if we can take information in.
Wow.
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you for being here. Appreciate you.
Leilani Boylan, I'm the Director of Social Services in Sullivan County. I oversee Child Protective Services, foster care, preventive, and ADS. And same thing, looking to see what you guys, and a lot of Orange here, so what are you doing in Orange? And we need to be doing a bit more in Sullivan.
Thank you, Leilani. Appreciate you being here.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Allison Esposito. I'm a retired Deputy Inspector for the New York City Police Department. I'm a current congressional candidate here in New York's 18th District. Thank you, Brian, for setting this up and inviting me. In 25 years, I've had unfortunately, a lot of exposure to human trafficking and domestic violence. And there's an estimation right now that our State Department says 27 million worldwide, but it could be as much as 50 million individuals. And it's being exacerbated in our communities by the migrant crisis and what's going on at our southern and northern border. I definitely think that we need to break down silos of communication, and we have to train our officers and our first responders to better be aware of the situation and the ability to identify what was going on. There are many instances where I came into a scene and the individuals that were trafficked were wide-eyed but not saying anything. And if the officers don't know what to look for, imagine having a bunch of cops come into your apartment and you think you're saved. And you have a wide-eyed look but don't say anything, and those officers walk back out. So we have to do a better job at breaking down the silos of communication, making sure that we have the funding and the resources available to combat what is, in my opinion, pure evil. So I appreciate the roundtable, and I appreciate everyone being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison.
My name is Jeff Owen. I'm a Lieutenant Bureau Commander of Operations for City of Middletown Police Department. Been there about 19 years. I oversee the patrol division. Middletown is the largest municipal agency in Orange County. We're a busy, urban, diverse community. We know that there is trafficking going on in our community, but we don't always do a great job of recognizing it and getting our officers to take action on those things. As the Deputy Inspector said, we need more training, we need more information, we need more information sharing among the different agencies, and people taking note of what's going on in the community and then delivering it to us. The officers that we have on the field are that first line of defense. We can't do it alone, but we're here to learn what we can and what resources we need to bring to our department to serve our community, to serve the Orange County region, and ensure that we are doing whatever we can to protect the vulnerable people in our population.
Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
My name is Rob Drall, and I'm the town supervisor for the town of Blooming Grove. I've been either a mayor or town supervisor for about 18 years. I've heard of these cases, and the cases seem to be growing in Orange County. I'm really here to learn more and also get resources for my police department. My police chief was unfortunately unable to attend, so that's why I'm here. but get the resources in the Hudson Valley and local resources so that I can bring it back to our department, our police department, and to town hall. Because we even have people walk into town hall sometimes and they're seeking assistance, but they don't know how to ask for it. So they come to the clerk's office, they come to the tax receiver's office, they come to my office, and it takes a while to get that information out. So we're trying to also find resources that when this does occur, who can we reach out to immediately to get these people the assistance that they need.
And what you'll hear a lot from this table is a lot of those resources exist in the room, but they need support because they are just completely under-resourced and understaffed for the need that's out there. So a good thing is when you look for what resources are available here, you're going to hear a lot about that in this room and take it with you, but we also need to do more to support them. Sir?
Thank you for having me. My name is David Weiss. I'm the Chief of the Human Trafficking Unit at the Kings County Brooklyn DA's office down in the city. I've been focusing on human trafficking cases for about the last 11 years and prosecutor for almost 19 years. And obviously New York, like Deputy Inspector mentioned, is a huge hub. I know I've worked with her on several cases back when she was the commanding officer of a precinct in Crown Heights, where we're getting people from all over the state. There's a lot of overlap in New York City within the different counties because we're so close across one street in Brooklyn, now you're in Queens. And we've had a lot of cases where girls and children are going up and down between upstate, downstate, and Orange County as well. So there's just a lot of issues that we're all dealing with. And I think everyone in our different respective areas, big city or smaller cities, have similar challenges. So I think just having meetings like this is incredible, and appreciate you for organizing this. And because I think this is so important to really see how we can tackle it from everybody's angles. Because everyone's got specific issues that we can all help each other. So.
Thank you. And being from Brooklyn and coming all the way up here, we appreciate your time today. So thank you for that. And we appreciate your perspective.
Good morning. My name is David Garcia. I am the coordinator of the Dutchess County Human Trafficking Task Force. I work for the Department of Community and Family Services. I have 31 years in child welfare. My background is as a CPS worker and supervisor. Did severe physical injury and sexual abuse at one point. I am also the Dutchess County liaison for Safe Harbor, the New York State Office of Children and Family Services response to youth in care who are at risk of being trafficked. So I work with youth to the age of 21 who have been trafficked or are at risk of being trafficked. I do a lot of presentations in schools and in the community. Just came to learn from everybody. I see Orange County as our sister in this response to trafficking. Learned a lot from their Fearless program. And I just like outreach.
Thank you for being here, David.
Sure.
Good morning. My name is Neha Gallagher. I'm an MA candidate at Seton Hall University. I study international relations with a focus on human rights law and foreign policy. And as of August, I'm a trafficking prevention advocate for Fearless and training.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me be here.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Cameron Hammond. I'm also a trafficking prevention advocate in training. And I'm just really happy to be here and get to sit in.
Hi, good morning. I'm Natalie. I am the Child Welfare Advocacy Program Manager with Fearless Hudson Valley. I wear a couple different hats, so I supervise our trafficking and prevention advocates and also our CPS-TV advocates. We work very closely with our partners in child welfare and other like DSS agencies, and just kind of work with the youth and setting up like home visits and just supporting the youth who have been exploited or vulnerable to exploiting.
I'm going to pick your brain after this on mandated reporting.
Sure.
Sound good?
Yeah.
All right.
Good morning. My name is Dana Newman. I'm the coordinator of the Orange County Child Advocacy Center. I've worked for the Department of Social Services for over 23 years in multiple capacities, foster care, CPS. I also investigated sex abuse, physical abuse for about 11 years before becoming the coordinator in 2019 when we started our CAC. So I interview a lot of the victims that are trafficking victims, sex abuse victims, so I see firsthand working with them directly, with interviewing them, how they came across the border, what that looks like, referring to Fearless, to Safe Harbor, to other SAPA, our other partner. We partner with all these agencies as part of our executive leadership. And what I'm looking for really is a better understanding or training on how our victims are coming across, right? Like they tell their stories and we hear it from them, right? We got the coyote, someone drove us in a truck, like that's what I'd like to hear. And someone suggested really getting trained by the truck drivers because they're the ones bringing a lot of our victims across. So that's what I would like to gain, better insight and knowledge on how the victims are actually getting here, that process.
I've been educated in great detail about that from certain law enforcement agencies. So we'll definitely, if it's not in this room in this conversation because there's so many facets, we will chat about some stuff I can give you on that. I'm sure we'll touch on it in this room as well. Sir?
Keith Dworkin, Chief of Police, Village of Millbrook PD, 33 years in law enforcement. I'm here today to learn from all of your experiences and bring that back to my department so we can improve our operations.
Millbrook, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Ken Roman, also with the Village of Millbrook. I've got 40 years in law enforcement. I'm retired from Town of Poughkeepsie Police as a captain, and I've been in numerous roles in the community. I was an elected in the county legislature for 9 years, and I've been very, very interested in this topic. It's something that's near and dear in our community. We have a very large bilingual community from all over Central and South America, and I think it's a much ignored topic by law enforcement for well over a decade or more, and especially in the Hudson Valley. I think it's great to hear this is taking place, and Brian, I commend you for getting everyone together.
Yeah, no problem. And one thing that I realized right away is people don't want to talk about this issue. It's uncomfortable, let alone from the fact that people don't truly understand it. When you start to understand it, you don't want to talk about it, as a human. So we got to overcome that, and that's what we're here doing today.
Hi, I'm Megan Baer. I'm the Director of Crisis Services for Mental Health Association in Orange County. I oversee the 988 Suicide Prevention Hotline, 311 Orange County Crisis Call Center, our Vet to Vet peer program, as well as our sexual assault prevention advocacy program in the county. I'm here as a resource, really. So our advocates for the sexual assault prevention advocacy program respond to all hospitals and police departments 24/7, no matter the age, no matter the time. There's 3 of them and 1 of me, and we make sure we cover the entire county, always there in person. So we are kind of almost like the first person to really talk to them and listen to them in the hospitals specifically. So that's fine.
Thanks, Megan.
Good morning, I'm Patricia Hansen. I'm an investigator with the Orange County Sheriff's Office. I'm also a TFO with Homeland Security. Myself and my partner here investigate human and drug trafficking as well as child pornography, which all seem to be intertwined.
Yeah.
Investigator Mike Ashcraft, as Patty said, Orange County Sheriff's Office, TFO with HSI. Yeah, this is kind of what HSI does. They do a lot of human trafficking, so that's about it.
Appreciate you. We'll be picking your brain today. Thank you.
My name is Eric Hargett with the City of Middletown Police Department. I'm a Lieutenant Bureau Commander of Services with the department. I first want to say thank you for getting this together. When I think of this room, and just an estimation, there's probably about 600 years of experience in each of your disciplines with all of us together. If there's one thing I've learned in law enforcement, and I'll let you all in on a little secret, we don't know everything. So we have to work on things as a team, and that's something that we've learned. We've learned that there's a lot that we don't know. When it comes to services, this is definitely an opportunity for us to learn, for us to give input as well, but for us to certainly learn and take things back to our agencies. That saying, it takes a family to, it takes a village to raise a family. It also takes a village to solve an issue. And that's what this represents. And in 2024, from law enforcement, if there's one thing that we have learned, it's that you have to think outside the box to resolve some of these issues. And I think that we have had some great success working as a team with platforms just like this for homelessness, for those with mental health issues, and this is the next issue that we really need to focus on. So I'm thankful for another opportunity to be able to do that, sir.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Kellyanne Costellarier. I'm the Executive Director of Fearless Hudson Valley. Some may know us as formerly Safe Homes of Orange County. We have been working with trafficking survivors, I think, probably since the inception. I think oftentimes they were misidentified, either themselves identifying the person that was trafficking them as their intimate partner, or being misclassified in their engagement with law enforcement. We formalized much of our work around the Safe Harbor program and the Safe Harbor laws, initially in Orange County, and have regionalized in Orange and Sullivan because we have cross partners and work collaboratively with our law enforcement partners. And certainly would echo so many of the things around the room, and also just balancing that there's lots of education and training and support that needs to be done, and continuing to work through the myths and misconceptions of who is our survivors and victims. and balancing anybody can really be a victim of trafficking and be at risk and vulnerable. And certainly are working with many of our collaborative partners, including the NYPD. They are often supporting returning many of our youth that end up in the city. And just would also say that our drive from a victim service agency perspective is to always provide training and support and services to the partners that are in this room, recognizing that the state still underfunds training for agencies like ours. In fact, larger funders like Office of Victim Services doesn't even support training and prevention work. And so much of that is being done with little to no support or funding in that process. And so, you know, just remembering these things, but more importantly, working with victims and survivors is critical, but recognizing that we need just as many resources to focus on the demand and the fact that this is a criminal enterprise. And there are far more people benefiting from trafficking than we often recognize. And there are local businesses that look the other way. There are businesses that are making thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, even locally, by running a criminal enterprise. And once we view this as a criminal enterprise, and we recognize that without focusing on the demand, we really will not have impact. We're here to support survivors and work with anybody in the room, but many of the victims who return on the same locations and same places and same streets that are not there on their own free will are there because they're placed there and because the demand is there. And if the demand was not there, whether that is on a street or online, then this would not be happening. And so we look forward to continuing to work with our partners in the room and being part of a very small part of the larger puzzle. But the demand is a huge issue. And the fact that other businesses and other community members are not being viewed as a criminal enterprise is a problem.
Yeah, hit on a lot of topics there we're going to get into. No, it's great, and it's great. And one of the things that people need to know, and what makes this even more uncomfortable, is the fact that that market, that demand, are people in our neighborhoods, people in our lives. They're not just folks from faraway countries. They're in this country. They're in our communities. We know some of the people consuming this information, which is a horrible truth to this situation. We have a family emergency from our district attorney, Dave Hoovler, but I know that he has staff here, our colleagues here, I should say. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yes, Chief Investigator Tommy Watson. Chief Investigator at the Orange County Police Attorney's Office. We have the Drug Task Force, which also deals with, Kelly, you're familiar, I think Paul Taylor and I shared a couple times. We deal with the prostitution and the city of Newburgh, city of Middletown, those types of investigations. And like I said, I don't think enough emphasis is put on the female prostitutes and what they're going through and the actual, I wouldn't say pimps, that are trafficking. District Attorney Hoover wanted to express that he's here to support in any way. Brett Whedon here is Deputy Chief. Brett can go on a little bit. We have the Digital Forensic Unit. He can explain that, how we can assist in investigations with the local agencies. And also I found out through my 27 years of experience with state police is that collaboration between agencies is the best way to get these type of, accomplish these type of investigations. So.
Thank you.
So as Chief Watson said, we run a digital forensic unit where we assist all, whether law enforcement or not, with any of the forensics being phones, computers. We also operate a Internet Crimes Against Children task force where we're working with the state and with the Orange County Sheriff's Office that has a similar unit. So we do the same on a day-to-day basis where, and also attach federal with that.
You have an Internet Crimes Against Children task force?
Yes, we're affiliated with New York State along with the Sheriff's Office.
All right. Before we leave, I just want to catch up with you on that, okay? Because that's a big piece of what we've been talking about, is the exploitation part of it. Okay. Did I miss anyone else? All right, we have an awesome amount of staff here. Appreciate the Hudson News coming to cover this topic as well so we can get the word out. We're going to dive right into our 4 talking points. Now, the first one and the fourth one are very connected, so I just want to make it very clear. The last thing we're going to talk about is the training aspect, whether it's training of law enforcement, training of truck drivers, which is a really good point that has not been brought up yet, stuff like that. Training in schools, assemblies for kids and parents and teachers, all that stuff. That's going to be the last thing we talk about. The first discussion point is going to be how can New York strengthen support for survivors and communities. Typically, we'll have our nonprofits take the lead. We won't get too much into the law enforcement aspect because that will be in topic number 2. which is what coordination and tools do law enforcement and prosecutors need to better combat traffickers and help victims. And then the third is going to be the migrant crisis and how that's impacting us. So the first topic, how can New York strengthen support for survivors and communities? I will let Kellyanne take the lead, and David and some of our other nonprofits who are here to kind of chime in and just give us specifics, right? We've been doing this now seven times. We have a good idea of what some of the issues are. Tell us what your biggest issue is. We've heard housing. We heard obviously a variety of other issues that are related to domestic violence and the needs for other issues. Tell us what you're seeing on the ground.
I mean, I think the biggest challenge is understanding that many of the funding restrictions that come from the state really truly do not support holistic wraparound services for victims and survivors. And we don't want to talk about the realities of, many of these traffickers are exploiting our basic human needs. And we have conversations around the idea that, that children don't have basic human needs beyond finding, placement and love. But they want to go to McDonald's, they want to get their hair done, they want to go shopping, they want to do the things that all of us want to do. And you work within programs that have you, in essence, having bake sales for paper clips. And so the reality of it is that you really need to let many of your providers take the lead on determining how long someone needs to stay with us, how long their placement is. Everybody's healing and pathway is different, their recovery is different. And we are boxed in by state statutes, we're boxed in by regulations and administrative directives, but we're also boxed in with how all of us are funding. And so many of our organizations are operating from, operating as a creditor to the state. We're on reimbursement programs and are continuously expected to do more with less, even with our salaries for our employees. But the basic thing is that even having to articulate to the state the basic emergency services that victims and survivors need are often viewed as amenities, but they're not amenities. They're all the basic things that all of us want as humans as well too. And they need to ensure it because we can't support individuals when you have people exploiting the basic human needs, right? They want to go to a haircut, they want to go to the gym, they want to be able to get their shoes, and you're working within the constructs of nonprofits that are regulated by states who are told that these are not considered basic human needs. And so we're up against significant challenges in supporting victims and survivors, and there's a time frame. And the state sets that without understanding that each individual needs more time, and housing is a huge issue. And what happens when kids age out? There is literally no bridge whatsoever, right, to create economic self-sufficiency and to build a life outside of being recognized at the state level as a child.
David?
I have to agree with a lot of what she's speaking about. It's all about access and availability, and we find that in Dutchess County, our 18 to 21-year-olds are lacking services. They don't fit into any specific category. They are emotionally too young to be considered an adult and live on their own, but they don't they don't have access to services that they need. So there's not really housing for them. And what would put a 19-year-old up in individual housing, they probably would need supportive services. I think we opened our first transitional housing this past year for the 18 to 25 group, but it fills up. So that was, where do we put the rest of our 18 to 25 groups?
And then you have obviously transitional housing, emergency housing.
Correct.
So it's different types for different situations.
Correct.
And I know from what we've heard, some of that housing is being done in hotels, which gives them an ability to be potentially put in harm's way with other folks that are, part of that enterprise.
So Dutchess County has one program for the Empower program for youth who are in foster care, who have been trafficked or are at risk of being trafficked. They can house up to 12 individuals. Well, once that gets full, and they come from throughout the state. Once that gets full, where do we put the overflow?
They come from throughout the state. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just a referral process to that program, and they can house anyone who fits their criteria.
What we've heard also is when it comes to coming to this community or any community, given a name of a family member, which sometimes isn't a family member. Have you seen some of that as an issue?
Yeah, I work with a couple individuals up in Red Hook, which is part of Dutchess County, who have sponsors and then have been exploited by their sponsors.
Yeah.
So now we're looking for housing for those individuals because they're residents and they may have a letter from the federal government saying that they have been trafficked before they even come to me. So I will get a referral from an agency. The youth comes with a letter saying that they have been trafficked and what services can I provide them. So I did. I mean.
But that letter is a letter when it comes to the federal funding to support those services
Correct.
you provide.
Correct. It may give them access to Medicaid,
Okay.
food stamps, or if they would qualify, it gives them like a refugee status instead of an undocumented status once you're confirmed by the federal or state government.
Okay, we'll get into that in topic 3 for sure a lot more. Anyone else here from the nonprofit side that has some specific stories of working with individuals and some of the challenges based on services for victims and survivors?
I mean, ours specifically for staff, I mean, we're small. There's 3 advocates and myself, so really it's just a lot of like, you have to cover an entire county. That's 4 hospitals and 32 police departments. So it's really difficult, and I echo everything everyone says. We're regarding funding, we're piecemealing funding together to create one position, and if we don't have staff, we can't support, the calls that come in to hospitals and police departments. So it really comes, the root is there, and so I'm out 24/7. Our executive director is out sometimes in hospitals and police departments. So supporting survivors, really for us, it's just staffing really and funding.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Let me ask you this. When it comes to, this is an issue that's come up, and I don't mean to put people on the spot, but let's have a real conversation about it. When it comes to the dollars that are available, you guys often probably find yourself kind of fighting for the same, whether it's fundraising dollars or program dollars, as opposed to there being a dollar amount that is quantified in some way and realistically applied for and done, and like you said, a holistic way. Is that something you guys have to deal with as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you tell me like an example of what that really looks like though?
Yeah, I mean, we have the different RFPs that come out, that we have to apply for and different things like that. But it is hard. Like, we try and work as collaborative as possible with Fearless. Because I feel like our organizations kind of overlap a little bit with certain things. I don't know if like a specific example besides that.
Is that true also with like Safe Harbors and what other organizations? Because if you put everything together in a way, you can't obviously do that, but I'd love to be able to, at least in Orange County, quantify what we have available for this topic and how we can best support and grow everybody, as opposed to just one or two of you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, an example is that most of the standalone victim service agencies are strictly funded by victim service dollars. And those victim service dollars are very specific on what they fund and what they allow, and they really only support direct service staff. It's a highly competitive program. It's going to be out for an RFP again this year. We're also facing potentially looming cuts at the federal level between the VOCA and VAWA funds. Quite frankly, you're competing at times with these larger umbrella organizations that this is not their primary mission, and you don't have a grant writer. I write all of our grants. Myself or the associate director write all of our grants for the agency and have for 15 years. And you're writing to ensure that victims have access to services and can provide a crisis hotline and can provide a court accompaniment and emergency services. And there's no more money to go around. But the reality of that is that we should not have to compete for funds for victim services. Victim services funds should either be a block grant or be institutionalized within our communities, because no matter how much prevention education work we do, we still need to ensure that victims have support and services, and that those that are doing that work can focus on providing the services and not having fundraisers in order to close gaps around keeping the lights on, because much of our funding does not fund what they consider administration or overhead, and yet government agencies would never think of not funding those things, but they don't want to fund nonprofits to ensure that they have supervisors to provide comprehensive supervision to the staff on the ground. They don't want to fund to ensure that you have the lights on and that you have the ability to do your job. And so it is they have missed the mark for a very long time on how they have leveraged victim services funding. But more importantly, they have really handcuffed us to be able to do the work, because we're spending a lot of time chasing a dollar as opposed to being able to be in the field and support victims in services. And quite frankly, we're doing a lot of things for free because most of our stuff is not funded. Prevention education is not funded.
Sure.
Brian, can I bring something? I was contacted by Department of Social Services on this issue, and Safe Harbors at one time, I'm not talking about funding because I can't, but I'm telling you a discussion I had, went from 120,000 to 40. That's disgusting. I mean, it's not only the funding, it's what you're doing, because that was specifically set up for the sole purpose. I mean, even the court systems are realizing now, they now have for judges, although we can't ask questions, they now have us observing. I've been doing this a long time, but for the newer judges, observing what to look for. So for example, I mean, you have a person who comes in 12 years old with a Gucci bag, you look at the nails, I mean, you do a full observation. There's a way to ask without asking. Our attorney for the children, by their guidelines, cannot tell you a child is being trafficked. They can only tell you that if the child herself or himself or itself or whatever they self actually says to the attorney. So the attorneys are also handcuffed by the guidelines because they can't say that. However, with that being said, the courts in SIDS cases, special immigrant juvenile status cases, that is when a child is asking for status in this country who is 21 and under. And I have actually denied it on a few occasions. Most of the time we do not. But I have had coyotes come in. I have had people who, when they get on the stand, if they do, you have what I call that ick feeling. So you ask a couple of questions and you know there's no relationship and the person is not going to help you. Where that becomes a hard issue is if you don't grant the special immigrant juvenile status because there is no guardian or someone to take care of that person, you now have put that person in a unique situation. So as the courts, we are in a different role, but that's where hopefully social services and all these other agencies working collaboratively, we can maybe help that person. But they are not necessarily going to self-identify.
No, we've never learned that.
And so that is an issue. But everybody has to understand that with this whole issue, special immigrant juvenile status and all that it takes, most of the children coming in, there is no problem, but there is a small percentage.
When you observe something like that,
yes,
or a member of the system that's part of that process, the SIDS cases, is there a level of staffing or services or nonprofits or any role that is to be played to communicate, message, anything at all?
I have to be very careful. So if I really believe that it's really serious, I have the right to call in a child abuse and neglect.
Who would you call?
I would call the hotline if I felt it rose to that level. As a judge, it puts you in an unusual situation. We've done it before. The former judges have done it too. Because then the department, under the law, must, within 24 hours, make some type of contact. Can be in person, can be phone, and then must follow up with somebody. What we have found, there is something called a 1034, which is called a COI, or it's an investigation the department can do. The problem is that this is multi-level, because we used to, I don't want to get on my soapbox, but we used to have pins, and our legislature decimated it for Orange County. And we have children now who are being, I know that, because we could not, as the courts, take those children, and if they needed to be properly placed outside the home, in the proper place, to get the services they needed, because they could not get it at home, etc. We were able to. We had Berkshire, we had all these, and each one got closed. And to me, that's a direct result where some of these children now do not have the safety.
We're gonna get to that
I don't want to get on
the
my
next topic.
soapbox.
No
I'm
worries.
just saying to you, it's an issue.
Agreed.
Brian, can I piggyback on what Judge Klein had mentioned? You know, as someone who works in child welfare, we have 24 hours to assess the safety of that child. But to what she was initially saying, a lot of times we'll place those children in DSS custody and they are fearful of their lives because of the coyote. Mm-hmm. So they don't want to go to school. They don't want to do the things that they're obligated to do as a foster child, right? Go to school. They want to work and send money home to their parent because they're afraid that their mom is going to be killed by the coyote. So then they run away from foster care. So it is a very big problem, you know, much larger problem than just assessing their safety and putting them in DSS custody, because since we're in our custody, they don't want to stay in our custody because they have another motive, and that is to usually work and send money home to ensure their parents' well-being usually.
And from housing to haircuts, they're being provided those needs by these individuals, whereas the programs that we're all referring to are so limited financially and through other resources, staffing.
We've heard a lot of that throughout the state. We hear individuals, whether it's social services, nonprofit, you get them, you talk to them, you develop a relationship with them, and they say, why am I going to take this risk? You can't give me a basic place to live. You can't give me a haircut. You can't give me any of these things, and this person's providing it. And as awful as my life is, I'm better off in that situation, which is a horrible, horrible status quo that we're in. So yeah, there's a lot of different creative discussions we've had at some of the other locations of people that have been working through those situations. And 9 times out of 10, it's a level of cooperation that is almost deemed inappropriate between law enforcement, nonprofit, other folks that maybe it's not in their wheelhouse, but they're just doing it because that's what they have to do. So in ways that we don't get people in trouble, what are some of those collaborations? How do those look, and how can we model them potentially or change certain laws to allow them to exist?
Can I talk a little bit about prior to the meeting I did a little research on the New York State trafficking program and legislation that Governor Hochul signed in last year. You know, she gave $2.3 million last September to the agencies that are funded by the Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, that RHTP program in response to human trafficking. There's 11 agencies statewide.
Yep.
The closest one here is Westchester.
Yep.
We got $275,000. I know from our perspective it's extremely difficult for us to facilitate any of that process to get somebody out of our community over to Westchester County to get them into those programs. It would be so much more beneficial if either agencies like Fearless or local county agencies could somehow buy into that money and not just have it for these other organizations. Westchester's a pretty busy county in and of itself. I would bet that there's very, very little money that is trickling out of that county. And you have 62 counties in New York State that are not receiving any of that funding.
We're totally aware of those numbers. It's horrible. And to make it worse, $2.3 million, right? 11 agencies statewide with a $237 billion New York State budget. That is absolutely horrifying. So that's going to be a big part of our findings in our study from a funding standpoint is I don't want to use the word laughable, but we'll come up with an appropriate word. But it's really, That's going to be every 20 minutes until we switch topics. That's going to be a really important part of what we talk about is the embarrassing amount of money allocated to this issue. Obviously, we're not going to try to get into the political in this room of what money is being spent on and how much we don't think it should be on those particular things. We know that there's money that needs to be redirected. We know that there are things that need to be shifted. The goal is to present this in a way that is bipartisan, because in New York State, Democrats have to write the laws. You got to be able to work with people. That's the reality of our situation. We're not here just to check boxes and make feel good. No, we're here to figure out real recommendations based on real life experiences that we as Republicans can pitch to create a conversation that strikes at the heart of people's souls and humanity, so that it can create action from our Democrat colleagues and have bipartisan stuff get done. So we have people paying attention, and we're going to move on to the next topic, but I will tell you, when it comes to what we're doing here, our goal is to not waste your time that you've given us today. We know you guys are on the ground. We know by being here, you're taking time and attention away from the people that you need to help with the time and resources you already don't have. So our goal as a staff, and me personally as the co-chair of this task force, is to just let you know we're going to work hard to put this together in a right way, in a meaningful way. And as much as you're saying things now and some people having a chance to chat, email us specific ideas, email us specific testimonials, email us contact information for survivors that are willing to talk, because when we have messages to deliver, our goal is to have those individuals who are comfortable enough to deliver that message to legislators and others as part of hearings.
Is there a lobbying day? Like, we went up for this. Sorry.
No, you're good. Every Tuesday. You're good. So from this, we've already begun planning some sort of lobby day for a list of potential recommendations that we will be putting together in a report that we hope will come out in January, which is Trafficking Awareness Month in the state, or I think the nation. High horse, sorry, let me get off. But I wanted you all to know some of that information, kind of what we're going to be utilizing all this stuff for, and that it's worth your time to be here. We're going to move on to group 2, but again, anything group 1 who didn't talk, email us. Email me if you have something to say. If there's a specific housing issue. For the nonprofits in the room, send me how many beds you have. Send me how many employees you have as opposed to the need, and what the difference is that you know of. Obviously, it's hard to quantify. Send me all that information. We're doing that all over the state for an ability to make our arguments. I know that's tough and it'll be depressing, but we need to know that information. All right. What coordination and tools do law enforcement and prosecutors need to better combat traffickers and help victims? Obviously, we heard of PINs a little bit. We all know the status of bail reform. I'm very curious to hear from both law enforcement and our nonprofits the impact of Raise the Age. And we don't need to get into a huge political conversation, but I really want to hear from our nonprofits on what that has really looked like. And I'm not ignorant enough to think we're going to repeal anything or should repeal anything, right? But where can we make certain changes that would make sense in specific situations on both that issue, on anything in general, because this is something that law enforcement will speak to when it comes to these needs, but I really want to hear from some of the other individuals in the room in a collaborative way on this issue. So who wants to lead us?
Well, since I've been in office, the biggest thing is collaborating with all the law enforcement agencies. And like we said earlier, there's over 30 police agencies. We work with the federal agencies. The biggest dysfunction is the federal government and our local agencies. I was on the ground when the first airplane came into Orange County Airport, and then subsequently when 2 more came to the Orange County Airport. There were no federal agents on those planes. They were contractors for the federal government. There were children on the plane. They were all teenage-age children. We had absolutely no clue what they were there for. It was initially called in as human trafficking. There was no way for us to identify it. The contractors blocked us from all that information. The federal government never notified us that we would have this massive airplane pulling into small Orange County Airport. There's a large dysfunction with that. And like I said, we talk about collaboration with local police agencies, state police, the FBI, HSI, DEA, ATF, we're all working together. It's not the local guys. It's somewhere a little south of us, that there's a complete dysfunction with the locals. And that's something that on the state level, I don't know how you could address that, but we address it by assigning some of our folks with the federal agencies, just so that like we can work together to better help and assist with this. A lot of the children that were getting off those planes are all dressed alike with black bags, and that was it. They had masks on, and they were going off into the world, and nobody knows where they're going. They're going to pseudo families, or just folks that are, I want to believe that they're kind enough to offer shelter and food and a better life for them, but there was no way for us as law enforcement in this county seeing that occur in our county and just having no access to any of the information.
The federal communication, especially on an issue like that, obviously is something we want to know, we want to have put in a report. But let me ask you something specific to like New York State green light and that specific law, and in terms of communicating with other law enforcement agencies at the local level, state level. How has that impacted on this issue and in general, and what potential changes or carve-outs we've been hearing, potential carve-outs for trafficking, so that law enforcement agencies can actually communicate with each other. One instance we had was not being able to determine because they couldn't run a license plate. When I found that out, I was a little just completely confused. But little things like that, they're not allowed to do, and obviously it's illegal for them to communicate in certain aspects with law enforcement. So not just for you, but anybody in the room, have you guys seen that? What has the impact been, and what potential changes can we make to that?
I'm not aware of any.
Okay.
Those instances.
All right. That's why we've been going all over the state. That was the northern border in Buffalo, and it was a very scary conversation because what we found and what we learned is there are more persons of interest that are on the watch list coming through the northern border right now than the southern border, and that is a fact. We heard and we know. So that's something that impacts all of our communities, especially being here in New York State. And we really want to be able to determine if green light or any law at the state level is preventing you from being able to talk to the law enforcement agencies, whether it be federal or state. And if that's not happening right now, or we can chat about it later, that's fine as well.
So they weren't allowed to run the license plate?
No.
Of a suspected
Correct.
traffic?
Correct.
And this is local?
That's a state law. Yeah, it's not local. No, it's not local. But it was due to a state law.
I don't know of any law, like we have the ability to run anybody's plate at any time. As long as that vehicle's operating on the roadway, we can run a license plate at any time.
I'm gonna give you the scenario. We'll do it offline, but I would love to get your opinion on it. Sure. And since you're unaware of it, I think that's a good thing because it's an opportunity for us all to educate ourselves. But I would really like your perspective on this particular case.
I think the sanctuary cities failed to report, and that's part of the issue. We coordinate with each other, and we'll report if we have something of that nature. But there's sanctuary places that refuse to report that stuff, so they continue to allow the problem to fester.
All right. Well,
since we're a sanctuary state, if that's festering, then that could be contributory to this incident.
Yeah, no, there is a specific state law that was created that prevented a law enforcement agency from running a license plate.
Which would be a sanctuary
yes,
status
correct.
law, which is...
All right, so from a carve-out standpoint, like that recommendation we're going to have at the state level, which makes common sense, if you have anything or you talk to your departments and they know of anything, please let us know of that. Because that was one instance, and we know it happens a lot in the northern border portions of those communities, but I want to know if it's happening here in the Hudson Valley as well. Okay. Anything else law enforcement related? What tools and resources can we give to law enforcement?
Brian, man. A couple of things, and that's always what I love about these, is the things that come to your brain while we're all discussing. And I'm very big on tangible ideas, tangible things that you can go out to the field and implement tomorrow. Some things that have come to mind during this meeting that I think we can do from a law enforcement perspective, and then obviously we would need some tools to do so. But I think in Orange County, we still have a lot of agencies, very simple, that are using programs like Too Good for Drugs, that are using DARE. How do we incorporate this? And I know it goes into the Group 4 question as well, but we can easily, I think, incorporate, as long as we train our officers that are doing it, incorporate human trafficking and have more of a focus in the schools with those programs, I think is something that we can do tomorrow. Another thing we do, Chief Iwanchu for the City of Middletown Police Department, he's one of the most forward-thinking people I've ever been blessed to be around in my life, in my career. We know that these amazing services that we have, we know that you're spread thin, we know that. We know that Fearless is, we know that CPS is, we know 311 is as well. He was forward-thinking enough to get us our own service coordinator that we were able to hire. And we have used that service coordinator. They are in our police station, they are in-house. They work for the City of Middletown Police Department, and it has given us the ability to get him out to calls, to get him into the community. And we understand there's times that these victims of whatever the crime is, they don't always want to talk to an officer in uniform. He has bridged gaps. We also understand that we in law enforcement, we don't know every service. We're getting better, but we don't know every service that's available. He came into our agency with things that we've never thought of. He's connected dots with programs, with other services that we never thought of. And he did that in the first week, and he's just going out into the field more and more. But he works for us, he works for our city. And our mayor played a role in granting us that position as well. So we're very, very thankful for that. But those ideas of thinking outside the box a little bit, having someone in your station that works for your department, we have seen tremendous benefits. And that is thanks to the forward thinking of Chief Iwanchu. So again, we know that funding is something that's always going to be tough. We know that housing is something that's always going to be tough. Raise the Age has played a role in some of that as well. But those are two tangible things that I think as law enforcement officials, we can get that done. And we can get that done now. And the benefits, if anybody ever wants to reach out to us or Chief Iwanchu as far as that court service coordinator position, and the benefits that we've seen from it, we would love to share with you. It's been an absolute blessing to our department and to our community as well.
So I think yes, but I would love to get a report on that. I'd love for that to be part of our findings as part of this report, because again, in Long Island, we learned a whole lot of amazing programs and collaborations that are taking place. So if you have a program like that we can model and show people and give awareness in this community that it's happening, please, we'd like to have as much of that documentation as possible. And
yes, sir.
Maybe another follow-up meeting just with you guys.
Yes, sir.
All right.
Just to piggyback on that, in addition to our service coordinator, we also have a relationship with Fearless that's extremely valuable in the human trafficking element,
yes,
because we have the risk reduction response program, RRP, in which we have a co-located member of Fearless staff in our agency that's regularly reviewing our paperwork, our documentation. And she is able to pick out instances that could be concerning and identify that for follow-up. And we have a lot of agencies in Orange County, and they don't have the resources like a big agency like the City of Middletown does. The more agencies that you could get a representative like Fearless into those agencies, it would be absolutely beneficial, because you're going to have that second set of eyes. The cops that are going into calls day to day are not necessarily in tune and identifying those little nuances. They're like, hey, something seems off here. They may not recognize a pattern that a trained domestic violence coordinator is going to see and say, hey, we should delve into this a little bit further and look at this and maybe send an officer back for follow-up.
So I think that's great, and I think especially in Orange County and some of these smaller town and village departments, I think having the type of training and the type of knowledge that you guys have, along with bringing in someone like Fearless or someone else to provide that training, one should just happen everywhere in every department, like Blooming Grove or town of Montgomery. I think when it comes to the training aspect, we're going to keep going to option 4, and I'm going to call on you in a little bit, because one thing I realized going around the state is you guys have some creative things you're doing that I think a lot of the local departments could learn from. If you wanted to take a moment, and I feel your brain moving a little bit.
Sure, I mean, it's kind of touching on everything what you're saying with the coordination, and so we're also unique in Brooklyn. I know Suffolk has it in some capacity, and Westchester has it as well. We're also federally funded in our office by the Department of Justice, have like an enhanced collaborative model of task forces. Different than a TFO status that most police departments are familiar with. This is money to partner a law enforcement agency, and in our case, it's the Brooklyn DA's office, with a service provider, and that's Safe Horizon. That's a model around the country. There's currently about 40 or 50 of those task forces around the country where they get equal funding, where they're putting in joint applications, social services, and law enforcement, because society, we're recognizing that on our end for law enforcement, we can't do it without you guys, you can't do it without us. Like, you can keep giving services if the trafficker keeps recruiting them, and so it has to be like a collaborative and coordinated effort. So it's basically working together from a variety of standpoints. Because also, there's a place like New York City where it's so large, there's so many agencies, even within government and law enforcement, and a lot of people don't know what the other person's doing. There's overlap in smaller departments where they just don't have enough resources. It's kind of like pulling it together and sharing. So I share that from the law enforcement side when we have bi-monthly meetings where we have the full task force. We have partners, and part of what we've done is work on bringing everybody that can contribute to the room, from law enforcement, government agencies, working with OCA, working with almost every service provider in our area under the sun, from the city, state, and also federal level, all sitting together and regularly communicating, kind of meetings like this. So we're not having, we have like a dedicated, that works for our office, is the director of that task force, that coordinates those meetings, coordinates those services, so we know each other, so we know the right people. So that's one barrier that we don't have to deal with anymore. Like, hey, I have this case, like, what type of service? No, we have the network. Hey, we have a list there. Hey, everyone, who can help on this case? This is an issue we have. We have this type of victim. We can have the appropriate service provider that can come in and help with this. And we work regularly with that, saying, hey, we're doing an operation, or we recovered this victim, and now we need the appropriate social service to help. And I'm going to call you for the licensing. You're going to help them get into school. Similar to the family justice center model that New York City has, that New York State has, where they're co-located. So we kind of have that. So we are sharing those resources and building through that red tape. They know who to call. A lot of the issues we get is, I don't even know who to call. I've called 311, I called 911, or I don't know even who the right person to call is. We're kind of having that phone book of we all work together, so we are able to kind of connect, hey, this is not my jurisdiction, but here's a prosecutor or a cop in that town where this happened, and vice versa. And through that, we've done, and that's group 4 part of that, touching on it, but part of that pathway model is to do trainings, and we do regular training for different professional services. And we've done a lot of training within hospitals and emergency departments and recognizing those signs, and that's brought referrals to law enforcement where now they're recognizing and identifying potential victims in their emergency departments, or CPS workers, or probation, or depends on the industry, where they're saying, hey, now I'm recognizing those signs, and now I have a direct pipeline to law enforcement, to social services. We bridge, through that partnership, we bridge gaps to some agencies that we're able to make available emergency housing that we're able to rely on for emergency short term, where it's become really useful. We can rely on that while we deal with what you guys are all talking about in group 1, like the larger need for full-time housing and transitional, but little things like that can kind of make a dent one at a time. So we kind of been trying to work on that regard of, and also building the community trust, building like where, obviously with a prosecutor, like it's different. I mean, once the prosecutor comes in, it's like, oh, it's much more serious. So the DA's involved. Oh, we can't disclose, we can't admit certain things. It's like, no, we're showing we're here for you. We're working together. We're not just sitting in a precinct, in a stare precinct where we're in a DA's office interviewing a victim and saying, hey, tell us everything. Like, you're having a social worker next to you. We're sitting in your house. We're sitting in a coffee shop. We're doing different things to kind of work together. Like, I'll go out with the detective regularly and the social worker saying, hey, we just want to talk to you. We want to make sure, we're not even asking about the case. Are you hungry? We'll bring you food. We'll bring you to check in on you. Kind of bridging that gap to show that, hey, law enforcement, police, and prosecutors are research, and they're not looking just, oh, if I can't make a case, I'm going to ignore it. No, we're going to help you however we can, and then work on what can we do to strengthen it from our standpoint.
So what I love about Brooklyn being in the room is there's so much volume that the city deals with. And in my conversations with pretty much all the agencies that are law enforcement or nonprofits that in New York City dealing with this issue, it will benefit the Hudson Valley Task Force and Orange County Task Force so much to speak with New York City, Western New York, Northern. One thing I've realized is just there are so many things that everyone can kind of learn and take from one another that if nothing else from this process, we will make a recommendation to the New York State Interagency Task Force on Human Trafficking that we have much more, whether it be virtual conversations or even a forum that exists. Again, this is tough because then you have the bad guys trying to get at this information and get a step ahead of you, but some type of forum or communication that exists where people can take some of these best practices and know that they're happening. within reason and within, you know, the ability of not being seen by the folks that are part of the problem. I don't know how to accomplish that, but it's definitely a part of this report that we're going to put together.
I mean, one thing I will say, that I know I've had this conversation years ago, and that's more New York City specific, because like I said, I have a county guard, but it does touch on New York State as a whole, where within each jurisdiction, I can prosecute only what happens in Brooklyn, but as we know, trafficking doesn't just stay on the same street. In New York City, and again, particularly because it's easier to cross county versus going from one county upstate is a lot more challenging, but some of the challenges of prosecution and recognizing how trauma presents and trying to work in a trauma-informed way, the way the laws are structured and how we can present evidence, I can only prosecute, but we know a case started in Orange County, which we've had the reverse as well, where they come down from Orange County, now they're in Brooklyn, we recover them, we work an investigation. Our indictment, our case will have to focus on the content and the actions that happen in Brooklyn, because I don't have jurisdiction for that. And then we I'll talk to the prosecutor, the officers in other jurisdictions saying, hey, where's going to be the stronger case? Where more trafficking happened? Because the last thing we want to do is, okay, you'll testify. Now, in a situation where we're going to have the survivor victim testify, which the whole separate conversation is, all right, you're going to testify in front of the grand jury and all the trauma that comes with testifying. Now, tomorrow you go to Queens and testify there. The next week you go to Albany and testify there. That's not good for the survivor. No. You don't want to do that. So we're kind of like hampering ourselves in a situation where if it's not a federal prosecution or the Attorney General that has larger jurisdiction, we're limited. And a thought that I've thought about over the years is expanding the jurisdiction for trafficking cases. Similar, like New York City has the Office of Special Narcotics, where there's citywide jurisdiction for narcotics prosecutions, doesn't matter where it happened. We've talked about potentially an idea of expanding that, making a similar model for human trafficking, and even having it statewide, where there's different jurisdictions where we could be able to make those cases. Like I know I've had conversations with the Attorney General's office, and they have to have like multiple counties to do things, but it just gets more challenging because I think having some law allow for other actions, not just as like, oh, Molyneux or to prove case of the motive, but actually charge activities not happening, I think can go a long way.
So I love that. Send me information on that. That is a really good idea and a really great comparison that you made about the New York City Office of Narcotics and how that's widened as well. I really, really want to hear more about that. Since we don't have enough time on this issue, just a couple highlights we've heard around the state. We obviously, and you probably can't get into it, but one of the things that are huge issues is the statute of limitations on victims of trafficking. They have a 5-year statute of limitations. So let's say they're trafficked, by the time they hit 18, by 23, they literally cannot identify the traffickers, even if they know exactly where they are. And sometimes it takes that long for you all to provide the services to get them to a place mentally to feel as though they can testify, and they can't. So that's a law that we're gonna recommend, obviously, to get changed, especially when you see us pass laws like the Child Victims Act, which is a similar concept, but we don't do it for trafficking. When it comes to law enforcement, federal laws are the ones that are typically the ones that get traffickers, right? So we can talk about services, and we obviously need to upkeep on services, but if you can provide all the services in the world, if there's not enough penalties for individuals committing these crimes at the state level too, what are we doing? So those are some recommendations, whether it's mandatory minimums or just beefing up the penalties and creating new laws. We got some amazing feedback from prosecutors in Long Island. If there are individuals from law enforcement or prosecutors in this room that have recommendations of certain laws that can be tweaked, obviously that's something we want to hear, and we want to be very, very realistic with. We're not going to be able to get everything that we want, but even if we can move the needle a little bit, right now it is safer and more profitable to traffic in humans, in labor and sex and exploitation, than a lot of other things that are happening, and that's why it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because it's easier to do.
So can I mention one more thing?
Yes.
So along those lines, and actually, I realized earlier I testified about that in November at the hearing for the statute of limitations, and something I raised then that I still think is another big issue is in grand jury in New York State, hearsay is not allowed. And most of the other states around the country, the federal system do allow for hearsay testimony. I mean, most of the other states don't really have a grand jury like we do in New York either, but a big challenge is when an arrest is made and now bail is set, we have 6 days to get the grand jury indicted, and that otherwise they'll get released. And that requires now the victim to testify. And in a short amount of time, and anyone working with survivors within 2-3 days, getting them prepared to testify about a potential trafficking situation that's happening for years or for months is extremely traumatic. It can take months, if ever, and I think, or even never. And I think not have the ability to have using hearsay on these special circumstances, I think we lose a lot of the ability to prosecute and investigate a lot of cases because the victim doesn't want to testify whether they ran away, they're too traumatic, they don't want to, they're still with the trafficker. We're kind of hampered on what charges we can bring unless we have direct evidence another way. And I think potentially having a carve out for starting with, let's say, trafficking cases, either trafficking survivors, sexual assault, or children or minors, where if there is that disclosure to law enforcement, similar to the way other states and the federal government as well, they have that investigator testify and say, I'm informed by the victim that these acts happen, and using some protections in place not to abuse that, which doesn't get abused around the country.
Would that also mitigate some of the discovery laws and the fear of a victim coming because of the new laws that have been created in that capacity as well?
Well, now you're not having recorded testimony. Absolutely. We've had some victims say, if I testify that
they're going to know.
You have to turn over.
You can't redact it enough, they're going to know.
Right.
Yeah.
The scenario of the circumstance is so specific, they'll know which victim testified. So absolutely. And then also it spares them that burden where we've had cases where we've had to put something on victims, like they're not ready yet to get on the stand, but they don't want the trafficker getting released 3 days later either. So they kind of push through that. So I think maybe having that carved out where for trafficking cases, we can have a hearsay exception where we can tweak the grand jury rules, and I think that might work as well.
Well, thank you for all that. We do have to move on to the next topic, but anyone who has any specifics in terms of recommendations for laws, anyone from the prosecution standpoint, anyone from the nonprofit world that deals with law enforcement, if you have some ideas, please email us, please send them our way. The next topic we're going to hit on is what impact is the migrant crisis having on human trafficking crimes within the state? Who would like to get us started? I'm going to ask a quick question of our, sorry to put you on the spot, Brian, our school district. When it comes to the schools, when it comes to individuals, especially when it comes to ENL, TESOL, English as a second language, have you seen an uptick in students? What does that look like? How has that hurt you from a resource standpoint?
Yeah, so for us, we haven't really seen too much in terms of an increase in population. Our population's pretty stable in Wallkill. I think probably more in a larger city, like Middletown probably has seen that. You know, we have farms and so forth in our area, so you'll have populations that'll come in pockets, that'll come into Wallkill or any other place. Millbrook, I know, I used to work there, so there's a lot of farms out there too. So you have a lot of workers that work on the farms there. So I think the biggest thing for us is no different than anybody else. It's funding. So you know, we're fortunate. We've been very supported by our community, and we have a great Board of Education. We have social workers in all the buildings. We also have a service prevention provider, similar to what you have, K-12, so we have one 7-12, and we have one at the elementary level that look for services outside of the school day to kind of help our families for whatever they are, you know, whether it's a homeless or maybe a migrant, you know, those type of things. That's their job, drug prevention. So we really have that piece there. We also have police officers in all of our buildings, I think is another piece. It's kind of putting the whole picture together. You know, we're fortunate. But our struggle, uniquely in Wallkill, we're split in two districts, two counties. We're at the low end of Ulster County, so the services are in Kingston. It's difficult for our families in Plattekill to get all the way up to Ulster County to Kingston to get to those services. So something more regional in New Paltz would be beneficial for us. But the other piece is Orange County, we don't always tap into those resources, or we can't always get them because we only have a small piece of our district is in Orange County. So we're unique that way of trying to do that. You know, in terms of funding, yeah, we're always looking for more funding. You know, that's, we talk to Kevin all the time, the superintendent. You know, he's very big on funding and making it equal for everybody. But, you know, I think we're fortunate. I think we're in a pretty good spot, but it's not going to get any better or any easier, you know, down the road, depending on what the state does in terms of funding those services. There's lots of mandates in terms of ENL for teachers of a second language. Those change each year. That's the unknown. One year you could be good, the next year you have an influx, and you won't know what those students' needs are until you assess them. So you could have the potential of trying to add more staff right at the last second if you get an influx over the summer. So that's unique.
Appreciate all that. A big reason why I asked this question, especially when it comes to how we can be useful on this topic, is New York State over the last 2 years has budgeted not only funds that we know also exist that are beefing up other services and other departments, but New York State has funded $4.3 billion in the last 2 fiscal years, specifically to New York City to deal with the migrant crisis. If there is a way in this report to be able to speak to the services you already provide to folks who are undocumented, who are going through the immigration process, if there is a way to quantify the impact that you guys feel and also describe the services that you need to beef up, and there is any way to take some of those funds that exist, that is going to continue to rise, and give you all some relief, that is a big part of why I put this item on this topic. $4.3 billion. And I understand New York City is getting hit the hardest, but there are ways to, I believe, put some of those dollars into communities in all parts of New York State to help, not just on the trafficking side, but domestic violence and other issues, just naturally through identifying what exists and how to quantify it. So whether it's right here, right now, if all of you, especially the nonprofits in the room, can send me some information on the services you currently provide for those that are seeking asylum, those that are here in an undocumented manner, anyone at all that's going through the immigration process, we want to be able to make an argument to provide some of those resources to communities here and even school districts. Because we've seen a lot of teachers having to be hired, but there's no money to pay for them. Like you said, it's mostly the cities, but it's an issue that can also impact some of the smaller districts. Yes, ma'am.
I would, as I said, like we've been providing trafficking services for years, and obviously the use and access of U visas and T visas really changes depending on the administration at the federal level and whether those are accessible or not accessible. But the reality of it is that even if they are accessible, there's not enough immigration attorneys to go around. There's many things that are representing that this is an immigration attorney, but you really discover it's a caseworker coming from a nonprofit organization from New York City. There are very strict laws on what they consider giving legal advice, even if you just want to read in Spanish the form that an individual needs to fill out, and they can't get into a referral basis for what's up to 6 months to a year. That's after the hearing date that they're having. And so I would say that we partner with Legal Services of the Hudson Valley. We have a co-located attorney and paralegals in our office. We partnered on an immigration grant. We stopped applying for the federal ones because our sister organizations in New York City were the only ones getting them. And it's a huge lift for one person in our organization to write. It took me almost 100 hours. And so I would never apply for a federal grant again because they only select 2 or 3 agencies. And they're typically in the city or Westchester. But Legal Services stopped taking the immigration funding because it wasn't sustainable. They couldn't keep an attorney. They couldn't match the grant. And because it was always competitive, they didn't know how to hire someone without knowing next year if they would have the same funding to keep that attorney. And so I say that there has to be not only certainly the ability to access attorneys, but we really have to evaluate what we decide on is supporting individuals with basic paperwork, right? We don't have these same questions when we're filling out a social service application, but when you have them filling out information and English is not their first language and they need all this documentation, then all of a sudden it's like, no, they have to be in front of an attorney. But there is no immigration attorneys. Literally, there's a 6-month wait. We just called for someone recently who has a hearing in less than 45 days, and the earliest appointment they have is 6 months from now. Yeah. And so I just say, like, we have been working, and we've been successful at getting several T visas and U visas over the years, but there's just not enough attorneys to go around, and a lot of the things, just in my opinion, on basic paperwork, trained advocates can help fill out paperwork. And so you're really putting people in positions that they are either not prepared for their hearings or not showing up for their hearings, and we have this cycle of, of a lack of support in that process. And You know, I'd also just echo that, as the sheriff talked about earlier, I understand, like, you know, this lack of communication, but imagine if everyone in this county, including the service providers, knew that there were going to be individuals showing up at the airport, that we could have been prepared and we could have had emergency services and emergency basic human needs there and strategized on a way, regardless of what our opinions are, on how to support human beings. But we, as a victim service agency, we weren't even aware. And so to think about, even if those individuals aren't at the time victims, they are at risk of exploitation and vulnerability because they don't have their basic human needs met. And so here you have individuals that have none of their basic human needs met. None of us are prepared to meet those needs, and all that creates is a huge vulnerability for an individual who sees a profit and an ability to exploit human beings. But none of us were prepared, and again, could certainly have had feelings about that either way, but could have been prepared to welcome those individuals and ensure that some of their basic human needs were met immediately at that process.
Yeah. At the end of the day, these individuals are part of our communities. They are. So we have to figure it out. We have to work together, regardless of what our political views are. We can have those too, but we also can, you know, talk to each other and work together on that.
Brian, can I touch on something?
Yeah, please.
Just as Brian, as you brought up from the school's perspective, my wife works as a guidance counselor in a school in Orange County, and it goes on to the information sharing or lack thereof. I think a requirement and a legislative requirement that schools have to give and provide information in some specific time from school to school will be very, very beneficial. I think for police departments, we fall under Public Officers Law, Section 87 and 89, where we have exact, strict timelines where we have to release our information. I know my understanding is as these people are introduced in our communities and they go school to school, they may go to New York City, they may end up in Orange County, they may go back to New York City. Those schools, to my knowledge, there's no requirement to share that information on their background of where that student comes from, what they may have done disciplinary-wise within the school systems while they were there. I know that's something that my wife has expressed to me that she struggles with. She gets a brand new student and she knows nothing about that student. She will contact that school in New York City and she gets zero, and I do mean zero, information on where that student came from. Any disciplinary issues, you have no idea, no background. So I believe a legislative requirement that reporting has to be done school to school would be extremely beneficial with strict timeframes in that legislation.
Yeah, I can only speak for us. So I think in Orange County, and I'll speak for Ulster, and I was a little bit Dutchess, but I think that is fine. I think, you know, sharing information is probably pretty timely. You know, I work with our registrar, she's right outside my office. We'll request documents from local school districts. We'll get those. We're pretty good. Discipline records and so forth. You have to understand also a process too that did change is, and this was years ago before any of this, anyone who comes in, if they don't have documentation, we have to enroll them within 3 days, or we have to have a hearing as a residency hearing officer, whether or not they're actually or physically residing in the district. We have to enroll them. If they don't have paperwork or whatever, we have to enroll them. And then we have to make the best decision as to what grade they are in. You know, if they came from another country, you know, what's 11th grade there compared to 11th grade here, maybe different. So that we can figure out. Our job is to educate kids. We can figure that out and maneuver that. Yes, there's a problem coming from the city. You know, with documentation, if we call to try to get documentation from the city, that's a struggle. It's a large Department of Education. You have to call down. It's not like, hey, I'm going to call Pine Bush School District that's right next door to us, or Valley Central that's right next door, where you know the register, you have some sort of relationship. You don't have that. Westchester, you're probably okay, but from the city, yeah, you're probably going to have a struggle. I'm sure in Middletown, there's probably a large portion coming out. We have it too, on occasions. It's not as severe. That will be the case that you'll have it. But I'm going to call your more county, your schools within smaller counties, not big departments. It's going to be easier. There is a requirement where you have to, someone's got to register. Like if we have a student who's moving from District A to B, and they don't register, we'll call CPS and say, kids of age, they have to register in X district. They haven't, they've told us they've de-enrolled. We have that from time to time, where we'll do that. We try to work with the families, or we give them a heads up, hey, you're gonna be getting someone who's gonna register. But the discipline record, we'll go there. Yeah, sometimes you look and you're like, whoa, why didn't you call us to say, hey, by the way, someone was suspended, you know, for a long period of time? That's more of an oops. But I think it's the large cities where you're gonna have the biggest struggle, where you do the best you can. There's not, it's one of those things where it's always supposed to happen. You're not supposed to enroll somebody unless you have those records, but at the end of the day, you have to enroll them because the law changed and said you gotta enroll somebody within 3 days and then figure it out.
Do me a favor and send me that. And then from your standpoint, I'm very interested in sending that proposal to our staff in Albany to like run through that, to play that out, to see if that's also come up in other areas. That's an interesting one.
Right.
I don't think it's
not happening in all districts. I'm having a fight with that because I have children who cannot be enrolled because they don't have documentation too.
Oh, so you're saying districts don't do that? Okay.
I said some districts. I'm not calling out districts.
Some
I'm not calling out districts. I'm telling you the reality of other districts. Number two, if there is a custody fight, the districts are not going to enroll in
Sure.
unless they have it.
Yep.
3, guardianships where there's a question, they're not going to enroll. 4, they have questions as to who is the guardian, they're not going to enroll. So if they're enrolling 3 days here, great. It's not happening all the time. And I brought in superintendents, I brought in assistant superintendents, I brought in all over, all different districts to find out why you aren't enrolling. Even if you have a child who comes before me on a juvenile delinquency and suddenly there are things and the child's not being educated, they still have to do these things.
Yeah.
They're required under the law.
We're going to take a look at that law. Eamon, make a note on that one. I'm very curious to see how that reads.
Yeah, I'm going to make it very simple. You have to register them within 3 days, so if someone comes in and there's a guardianship question, I'm the residency hearing officer, so I'll make it easy.
Gotcha.
There's a question, easy, no problem. Send a letter, I'm going to have a residency hearing, and I'll have it within 3 days. I'm going to make a decision within 3 days if there's a guardianship or whether or not Johnny or Sally is actually living there or that they're living with the actual family. I have to make a decision within 3 days. Whenever there's a question there, that's what you have to do. I'm not saying everyone's doing that.
To the judge's point, we will actually inquire a little bit locally, I will, to see some districts on how they respond to that. I won't pick anyone out, I won't ask you to, I'll just call them all and see what I hear. So I wanted to touch on something Kellyanne said. So you brought up a point about having trained advocates filling out forms. Now, is that kind of making an argument, okay, if we don't have these immigration attorneys, more funding going towards advocates can help, at least with the paperwork aspect, so that they can be prepared for their hearings? I'm not saying replace, but because they don't exist.
There are states that definitely have, looked at the definition, and I can give you some of the legislation of states that have decided that there are things. I mean, we have those abilities in our ability to e-file petitions for victims of domestic violence around family offenses and support, listening to individuals and support them filling out their custody and child support. What's interesting is there's very different strict interpretations around the immigration paperwork. When you talk about also having a potential language barrier and then that person having to share with the individual how they got that paperwork filled out, the risk is always on the impact of that victim or survivor that needs that hearing. And so there's interpretations, at least for us, I mean, for many of our victims, we have to putting them on a train to go down and have access to even someone to help them with that paperwork or any of their hearings. Some of them have now moved up to White Plains, but we're covering the expenses of that. Yeah. So through victim service funds, which interesting enough, I mean, you talk about like the idea of many of our funding streams, for years had different rules on how they supported undocumented victims and survivors. And certainly at a federal and state level, those things aren't the same. But you think about those things also have to be supported. That victim has to now go from Orange County on a train, spend all day in the city, have access to a subway card, but also have access to basic needs while they're down there. They're certainly at risk because they're now in a very large city, and they are accessible to everybody in the city, and also trying to navigate that system. And if we have someone available, at times I've sent an advocate, but we don't have the ability to always send an advocate, even just to support that person in getting from our train station and then navigating down in New York City to have that appointment. But some of these things also can be supported, as some of our jurisdictions here did during COVID, with Zoom, and can be supported with advocates there, but also ensuring that the person understands the things that they need and why they need that. But it is such a cold environment without a lack of support for the individual who's not only navigating their documentation status, but also English is not their first language, or maybe not their language at all. And so definitely, yes. I mean, it seems like there are even more stricter expectations and rules around who can support victims of trafficking when they need immigration documentation, paperwork filled out, hearings, etc.
I think that's a larger conversation that we'll have also offline. Is everything necessarily filled out, and what could be the obligation of an advocate as opposed to an immigration attorney, and how are we best using everyone's time currently, and how do we best provide resources and figure out how many of what we need? Because right now, I think that number of 4.3 billion is so large because there's just not enough work being done in a collaborative way, and money's getting thrown at it. Let's throw more money. But if a lot of those dollars don't necessarily have to go to the creation and funding of attorneys, that can go towards advocates and more nonprofits, that makes more sense. But we can talk about that another time. We got to move on to, go ahead.
Briefly talk about Middletown, because it's
sure.
Something that's very near and dear, not only to me and Eric, but it's certainly something that keeps Mayor Joe DeStefano and our chief up at night. It's a lot of the issues that we're referring to about people coming into communities. And Middletown, as an urban area, we are 41% Hispanic. We have a lot of services available, and what it does is we become the dumping ground. We become the area where everyone is funneled to because we have the services available. And it's placed a really large burden on every aspect of our city management, whether it's the police department, whether we have a soup kitchen, we have a library that provides assistance, we have the Salvation Army, we have we have mental health services, all that are readily available in our community. But we don't have the support for these people that are coming into the community, and they're attracted, and there's no infrastructure in place of how to coordinate these people and get them into the places that they need. We have the county's only homeless shelter in the city of Middletown. We also provide a warming station that's basically funded, or the only probably municipally funded warming station in the county, where on a regular basis, almost every single night, that those buildings are filled to capacity, to the point they're coming into our police department lobby and staying overnight, and again, going out into buildings, vacant buildings, trying to set up housing there, whatever they can do to find the resources to stay in Middletown. To have access to some of that funding would be extremely valuable for us. We can't coordinate the resources fast enough to meet with these people. We get U visas probably several times a month, U visa requests, because one of the qualifying features is they're a victim of a crime. We're pretty good with that. If it meets the criteria, we fill out paperwork, we send it in. But it is a massive amount of coordination on the part of our city to try and manage these individuals, and we're not getting the compensation. The school district, we're one of the largest school districts in the county. We have a very, very good relationship, but they're overrun. Yeah. English as a second language is a challenge. Yeah. We have probably 10 to 12 personnel of our 100 or so civilian and sworn staff members that can speak Spanish, and they are tasked every single day for hours on end dealing with individuals that have those language limitations. And some of them are not undocumented or migrants, but to try and there's definitely a large component. We don't have that on it. It's not really something that's easily tracked for us, but people from all over the region, not just Orange County, they're coming from Sullivan County, they're coming from Ulster County, because they hear you can go to Middletown and get a warm meal, get access to the services, and have a good quality of life in our city.
So we've seen that with the migrant crisis. We are seeing individuals land in a certain area and then move based on the services and based on those areas, like the city of Middletown, like New York City, right? But they're now getting out of the city because it's a bit, you know, it's what it is. I think we all have an idea. Those that live it know what it really is, but they're coming up here. They're gonna come more to Newport. They're gonna come more to the city of Middletown, Buffalo, Utica, all those areas. They're seeing it, and it's getting more and more every day. We will continue the conversation. This is one meeting in 2 hours. You're gonna all follow up with me. We got an awesome team and an awesome staff working on a lot of the coordination, not just for the report, but also to try to deal with these things in real time in as much of a way we can be helpful as a legislative office. We're gonna end this discussion over the last 15 minutes on training. This is an area where we've had some really amazing conversations. We need everybody trained. We need the general public to know through public service announcements, which we are gonna help put together next year. We need schools to be accepting to the fact that this is a problem that exists. I know we've had issues throughout the state, maybe in Orange County, I don't know, where schools say, no, we don't need to talk about human trafficking, that doesn't happen here. Obviously, that's not the right attitude. We need to combat that, we need to overcome that. Let's talk about some of the challenges from a nonprofit standpoint, and also from the schools, and also law enforcement. When it comes to training, what do you need? What do you want? How can it be made better? We've heard a lot. Love to hear from you.
I'll start. Although I am not for profit, I am a county government employee. I do a lot of our awareness trainings. I'm trying to infiltrate our school systems. I'm in 3 school districts in their high school currently, and I believe Dutchess County has 13 school districts. Unacceptable. So I'm in Ketchum, Beacon, and just started Millbrook earlier this year, their high schools. So I go to their health class, take over health class for the day, may do 5 or 6 presentations on human trafficking to students in a row. So I'm trying to expand that. The school districts have a manual called, put out by New York Department of Education called Human Trafficking in America's Schools, which goes into great detail about trafficking. But no one is allowing us into their schools so that we can provide awareness in our communities. There's a fear because parents have a say if we can come in or not. So we're trying to expand that. I also, for the first time, am going to speak at our School Resource Officers Symposium. I've been doing this for 7 years, and this is the first invite I've gotten.
Wow.
So I don't know these individuals. I just did our cadets in training for the Dutchess County Sheriff's Office. Again, my first time speaking with law enforcement in that capacity. We do have law enforcement attached to our task force, but getting them to come to our task force is a different issue, where our task force is more service provider oriented, not really investigative. So we're not talking about cases, but we can. So they're invited to come. Do they show up? It's based on their schedule. We need to, of course, I do awareness for the community. So I spoke at a Building Bridges conference just this Friday, did 2 sessions. Ties me to some of the school staff. So out of that conference, I got 3 more schools who are now interested in allowing me to come in to speak to them about trafficking. I'll speak essentially to anybody, because that's part of our grant that we get from Safe Harbor to raise awareness and provide education for the community. I'm going to a church. I was invited to go speak to Mission Church in Poughkeepsie. So I'm going to do 45 minutes education for them. So awareness, I still don't believe law enforcement knows who I am and knows about our program, because I haven't gotten 1 referral on a youth who is at risk of being trafficked.
Wow.
And we don't need you to identify who's being trafficked. Just look at the risk indicators. A child who runs away frequently is a high risk indicator. If you're out on a call and you're tired of going out to the same family, send a referral to my program, and then I can go out to that family and try to engage that youth to see what's going on. And then we can build that system that way.
Let's chat after this, David. I have some ideas for you.
Sure.
Aside from this, I have some ideas for you. 3 out of 13, yeah.
There's also with law enforcement, that not only breaking down the silos and being able to communicate, but law enforcement is hemorrhaging experienced officers that have had exposure. And a lot of times in the small towns, you're not going to have the same level of exposure as with the city of Middletown or the city of New York. And it's really about recognition, and it's not so much investigatory. It's about identification of a problem. And officers sometimes are scope locked on getting this job over with and getting to the next job because there's 10 in the queue. And they're not taking the time that's needed to properly evaluate this situation. And they don't have the experience to be able to draw upon to say there's something wrong with this scenario. And I can give you an example. I responded to a scene. Thankfully, one of the other captains said, let's get somebody there of rank. And I walked into a scene, and I had a sergeant, 3 cops on the scene, and they're like, there's nothing wrong. There's a bunch of kids sleeping. And I walked into the scene, I did a walkthrough, I came back out, and I said, separate the boys from the girls, and get the boys out of the apartment. And then I looked at the girls, and I said, are you here against your will? And they all were just doing this. Those officers weren't doing anything wrong. They had no idea what they were dealing with. So the training is, it's an absolute, because we're hemorrhaging experienced officers. And it should be scenario-based, but it also should be when we can have victims that are putting in their input and they're comfortable enough responding to whether it's EMS or fire or a police station for multifaceted training of this is what I went through. This is, sometimes officers, even young officers, get hardened very quickly. So if you can have scenario-based or victim-based training where they're tugging on the heartstrings of this is my experience, this is what happened to me, this is how it felt when the officer walked out of the room because they didn't know any better. And then exposing officers to other, whether it's facilities or operations or, whether it's CPS or any other faction of this. They don't know it's there. We had Safe Horizons in all of our precincts. They took over a lot. We had neighborhood coordination. We had youth coordination that was able to follow. But the first officer on the scene has to be trained to identify that something is wrong. Has to know to open the refrigerator and see that there is no food in there. Has to know that it's not just about getting this job. And the way to do that is to get more training down to the lower level because we don't have the experience on the street with them anymore, and our victims are suffering because of it.
We've heard a lot of that, and that's something we're going to be absolutely spearheading in January when this all comes to a culmination, is getting into the academies, but not enough, right? Annual retraining, and it can't be unfunded. It can't be an unfunded mandate. We have to figure out a way to come up with a solution in terms of training, and you said it, victim-based training, Allison. That is what people know is most powerful, and so we want to be able to couple the nonprofits with our law enforcement and our school districts. And I know it's a sensitive subject, but if done appropriately, and I'm very interested to read the New York State Department of Education and what they physically have, because I know school districts are trying to do that with just their health teachers to adhere to the law, as opposed to having a Kellyanne group or someone else, Fearless I should say, come in and provide that training, or you, David, right?
Yeah, and just for clarity, I don't know if it's New York State Department of Education or the federal government who put that.
I'm going to find out, but if you have it handy, you can send along to me. I'd like to take a look at it.
I would just also, I don't take for granted that I've been very fortunate to be the general topics instructor at the Orange County Police Academy for 14 years now, and train on domestic violence and human trafficking. And I think it's important to stress that this is a muscle that has to be worked, and it's not a one-time thing. And the reality of it is yes, I deeply appreciate training the new recruits because they're like sponges, and they have no lived experience yet. And in-service is not mandated, and ongoing training is not supported and funded for officers around these topics, domestic violence, human trafficking, And I was just speaking to DCJS yesterday because they want to reduce the training in the academies around domestic violence for new recruits because they get in service later in their careers. And I said, I don't know who told you that, but that is not accurate. Most departments do not have the funding and resources to do that, and it's not prioritized unless you have someone from the top down that believes in these issues and values them. And, we just did an amazing, training with Highland School District, but it really took the relationship with the superintendent saying in our school district, elementary through high school, we are going to create a culture of learning around human trafficking. And everyone was involved in the discussion. All the teachers had something to give. But I was thinking about what the bureau chief said earlier. The reality of it is until we start making this collaboration and coordination mandated part of our culture and community on how we do our work, then it's often picked and chosen when they involve victim service agencies to work collaboratively together. And ultimately, we should be approaching all these cases from a coordinated response that we can't do this work without each other. Regardless of how we view the case, if it seems easy or it seems more challenging, but we often get called in. We're fortunate we have advocates in the district attorney's office in Orange County too, and we're working on one in Sullivan. We often get called in when the case is perceived challenging for the officer or the prosecutor on what they're trying to get done, whether it's to win the case or make an arrest. And that's certainly what we're here for. And we need to work together on all those cases, because what we know is the sooner victims have services and information, the more informed decisions they can make, and the more likely they will stay on board with the prosecutor's office and or potentially cooperate with police. So school districts too, it can't be based on personal relationships. But I can't stress enough that, I think law enforcement sometimes gets this idea that that the burden is all on them, but they get a lot of unfunded mandates. I think about the great law that just came that domestic violence victims can go to any precinct or police department and file a DIR. Still, more than 3/4 of the state, those departments are unaware of that law. And that's not on them. It's how they get their information, and it's how that information is communicated. There's no training on that communication. We still have departments that aren't willing to or unable to fill out the visa request, or even to certify for a domestically trafficked victim their ability to gain access to services in New York State. Because the officers aren't clear, the police department is not clear on how they can fill out that form for domestically trafficked victims. And all that does is access services for them in a pot of funding. And so it really requires not only creating legislation, but supporting the education and training on how that legislation and how those laws work, and giving officers the tools. If you want them to do the training, it has to be ongoing, and you have to support the department's funding to do that training on all shifts, at all times, and educate local towns and villages and cities, municipalities, that this overtime is not taxing their budget, is ensuring that their officers have the skills, training, and experience to do their jobs.
Yeah, we see that so much with state agencies, with the child care services cliff and the increase in allotment. Families don't know. That's a huge part of this. Can't just pass laws.
I agree with Kelly. It's muscle memory. We're an accredited agency. I have about 200 members on the patrol side, so I have to get them a minimum of 21 hours of training per year. We're doing far more than that. The overtime and the cost is exponential, and we don't get anything in return for that. Some of the larger agencies like Middletown, the city of Newburgh, not so much the town of Montgomery, my hometown, but they can afford to send their manpower for the training and do the recurring training to stay accredited. The smaller agencies, unfortunately, they're going to get domestic violence training, and they're going to go out and they know, separate the two parties, or whoever's got to be separated, remove somebody, fill out your paperwork, go to the next job. And that's just the sad nature of it, because we have so many police agencies up here, and many of them are part-time. So that causes another burden. They can't necessarily send them out through training like some of the larger agencies can do. So we try to offer as much in-house as we can. The police academy does a lot of in-house training, in-service training. We do in-service training. When we do our in-house training with our own folks, we offer it to the police chiefs. Any police chief can send any of their members at any time, because we know that their schedule, they're not necessarily working around the clock, but a part-time guy that works, he only works in the evenings, he could probably get into one of our trainings, because we're doing them throughout the day and in the evenings as well.
Thank you, Sheriff. I have some closing remarks, but is there anyone that had any final words they wanted to say? All right. So let me reiterate. This was great. I learned a little bit more for sure from a lot of you. And when we leave here, I just want you all to just have that same mindset. Whatever notes you have, whatever ideas you have, whatever we talked about and whatever we didn't, 3 days from now, if you think of something, email us. We have so much staff working on this. I am so blessed that our leadership has supported this project. It's our only task force we are doing this summer that was created. So our entire central staff, I won't say our entire central staff, but a large amount of them, they've been here, they've been throughout the state. We have a lot of personnel working on this. We want all the information. We want all of it. We want to be a little overwhelmed in a good way, and we want to do our best to create a document that's going to lead to something positive. And the second part is take the contacts you met today, right? If you don't have Dutchess County, there's somebody like David in your area. Talk to them. Talk to Dave, maybe he'll know. Talk to Kellyanne. But get yourselves the training that you guys need in your own departments locally, in the school districts. Be inviting. Let people in. Let's get creative. Let's figure this out. A couple things. Tim Tebow, he testified in Congress, and he talked about a story he heard about a child being exploited by their own mother. And basically he was talking and saying that there are these children that are being beaten to become beggars because if they look a certain way, they'll make more money. And a challenge I have to everybody in this room, some of you already live this life, but think about it this way. We want to do everything we can for that child, right? But in order to really figure out a way to get creative, to tackle this issue the way it needs to be tackled, we need to figure out a way to humble ourselves, to figure out what happened to that mother that put her in a position to do that to her child. It can't just be lead with anger, lead with passion, lead with emotion. We need to figure out a way on this particular issue of trafficking and exploitation to overcome that initial reaction we have and to just dig deep, get through it, and figure out a way to work together, put meaningful recommendations together from a legislative and a funding standpoint. And I believe with the brain power in this room and the dozen or other so rooms we've been in, send us the information, we'll do our jobs, and we'll not waste your time. We had another story of a mother in New York State that had a 14-year-old son. He was being exploited from a digital trafficker. Never met him, said he was another kid, got this 14-year-old to take an inappropriate picture of himself. That person then exploited that kid, asked for X amount of dollars or else we're gonna tell the whole world and your parents. That kid went to soccer practice, mother never saw him again, ended his own life. Exploitation is real. It's happening right here in New York State. Our kids need to be educated. Our school districts need to be accepting to this. I know many that are, and I know many that are not. We all need to figure out a way, and if anybody's giving you a hard time, call me. I'm being serious. Whether I represent that area or not, call me. Dave, call me. Everybody call me. And we'll make some calls, and we'll try to explain to folks through real life experiences, victim-based experiences. We'll even get them on the phone with the victims and the mothers and let them know this could happen in their school district. And the last thing I'll say is this. Going forward, and hopefully this task force accomplishes a lot of this in some way, we had another article of the CEO, former CEO of Abercrombie & Finch, Mike Jeffries, right? That just hit?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. That's what people think this is all. That's all it is. It's in the headlines. That's human trafficking. That's exploitation. That's a horrible, horrible, horrible thing that happened, but that's not the whole story. The whole story is much, much worse than that. And it's something that we can make a meaningful difference on, and I believe that. So thank you all for your time today. We will not waste it. Stick around, we'll chat. And again, send us as much information as possible, and we will do our very best, okay? Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.